Back to the Martian MMA podcast. I am your host. I am the Martian, also known as John, here to talk about this week's UFC card going down in Salt Lake City, Utah, headline by Alex Poatan Pereira taking on Khalil Rountree Jr. for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship. We got 12 fights going down at elevation. Got to keep that in mind. I think it's at like 6,000 or 7,000 above sea level, so that's a pretty significant thing to consider with some of these fights. I haven't really saw any fights that it massively stands out at, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. And we're going to get into all those fights here shortly. I think last week was not so good a week for me. I don't like to spend a whole lot of time giving a recap of fights, but I would say overall it was somewhere in between an okay and a bad week. Was proud of the fact that Imavov and Allen went the distance in very easy fashion. That was one of my more confident bets of the entire week. Matt Frevola let us down. Very bad performance from him. Chris Duncan came through, though. Altamirano let me down. Kevin Jousset didn't come through. And so, it was just an all right week. I did lose on the week overall, though. So enough about that, though. We're going to get into these fights. Although I have two things I want to say before I get into these fights. I just want to get them off my chest in the top of the program. And I don't really have any real reason for mentioning these. It's just some things I've been thinking about lately. The first one is that the Twitter space around MMA and MMA betting Twitter has gotten so gay over the past few years. It was fun for a while, but it's really fallen off lately, and I think it's just in an extremely pathetic place. And I like to tweet about fights, and I tweet about MMA, maybe occasionally boxing, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, but I really don't. I try not to have much of like a personal personality in my tweets, where I don't want to come off as being some guy who's giving out bets or telling you what to do or coming off as some strong personality. I don't understand why these guys seem to do that. I think they need some more friends or something in their social lives. But just beware of some of these guys who are just taking this shit too seriously. It's election season. If you see anybody with an MMA Twitter account talking about Trump or Kamala or something, unfollow that motherfucker and do yourself some justice. But that was one thing I wanted to say, not aimed at any person in particular, definitely not. I don't have anybody in mind. I see a few different people doing this, and it's something I wanted to say. And then the other thing was, are we sure that we should be continuing women's MMA fights in the UFC? I've got some friends, Carl from It's Not Cage Fighting being one of them, my absolute dog, Joey Coco, who loves women's MMA. He's going to hate to hear me say this, but I think it's about time we wrap up women's MMA in the UFC. I don't actually think it's ever going to happen, but the only reason women's MMA came into the UFC was because of Ronda Rousey. They asked Dana White, is women's MMA coming to the UFC? He said it's never happening. Ronda Rousey started creating a lot of traction. They brought her in. They made a shitload of money from her pay-per-views. But, we're several years removed from Ronda Rousey. We're several years removed from Amanda Nunes at this point. Chris Cyborg came and went. Joanna Jędrzejczyk came and went. We're at the point now where these women's MMA fights are so bad and so uncompelling that I don't even understand why we're continuing with them. Weili Zhang, her past few fights, a lot of lay and pray. The Yan Chen fight had some intrigue to it, but the Lemos fight, terrible. The Rocky Pennington and Bueno Silva fight, horrible. The most recent one, Shevchenko and Grasso, the whole crowd was behind Grasso. They had this great rivalry and trilogy, and the fight was absolutely putrid, and Dana White shit all over the fight. These fights are so bad, and there's just no reason to want to watch women's MMA, in my opinion. The skill level is bad. All the fights are going to the decision. We're seeing very little competitive fights. We're seeing very little, action in these fights, and they are just truly horrible. And we have 4 of these women's fights on this card, so bear with me with that. That's my little rant on. I just wanted to get those two things, off my chest and share with them, even though nobody probably cared. And we're going to get into the fights, the bets, because that's really what the only reason to care about these fights is. In the welterweight division, we're starting things off with two old legends here. Tim Means, Court McGee. Odds for this one: Tim Means favored -185. Court McGee +160. We got 40 and 39 years old. These guys have been around the block. Huge fan of Tim Means, but I'm actually betting against him here. I took Court McGee at +190. Because Court McGee has a bad chin, but he has good cardio, he has good wrestling, and the longer this fight goes, I think the more it favors Court McGee. The better striker of the two is Means, the guy who has a little bit better chin, because Tim Means' chin is pretty susceptible as well these days. Been knocked out several times in recent years, but you got to think that the striking and the early portion of the fight favors Tim Means because he's a little quicker and he has the more dangerous striking. But if Court McGee can avoid getting knocked out in the first 5 to 7 minutes of this fight, I think there's a great chance he takes over in the second and third round with his wrestling. We just saw the fight versus Morono where he finally decided to pursue a takedown in the third round, and he got that takedown easily, and he won the third round. So we know his cardio is fine. We know his wrestling is still capable of hitting takedowns, and we've also seen Tim Means kind of just give up later in fights lately, especially when he's faced with some grappling. Max Griffin, Kevin Holland, even Alex Morono was able to choke him in the second. So I like Court McGee before the fight for a small bet and be really ready to add on that live line on Court McGee here if he can survive the first round and make it to the second and third, where he could even get a finish on Means in those later rounds. I'm sure those props will be pretty enticing numbers. We're moving on to a fight that I believe we discussed before. They got canceled, I think the day of. OSP taking on Ryan Spann. Odds for this one: Spann -230, OSP +195. A little annoyed at this price because the first time it was booked, maybe a couple months ago, OSP was +275. I liked him at that number. I kind of fell asleep at the wheel when this fight was rebooked and never got back in on OSP, and now he's at 2-1. Which is still, fine, I would guess, because there's just no way you could ever lay juice on Ryan Spann. Like, this guy is so bad. He's lost 3 fights in a row. He's got finished multiple times. He quit in the Krylov fight. And, he fights at Fortis MMA, which is quite frankly just not a good gym. And we saw OSP just dismantle Kennedy and Zechiku from the same gym as a 5-1 underdog. Just, soundly outstruck Kennedy in that fight. So OSP, I believe, is honestly the better fighter everywhere. I think he's the better career fighter, has the better wins, and he has better skill in striking and grappling than Ryan Spann. But Spann is younger. He's a little more explosive. He needs a little less to go right for him to win this fight. But still, I think Spann winning the fight is pretty predicated on an early finish of some sort because we know he collapses as the fight goes on. And I think that has to make OSP the side here at 2-1. And, I won't officially endorse him for a bet at 200 here because I don't love the number anymore, but I do think it's OSP or pass, and it should be hectic early, and this one's probably going to finish in the first round or two like most Spann fights do, so hopefully OSP can get the job done. Wouldn't touch anything related to to Spann money line here. Under 1.5's at -110. That's always a decent way to play Spann fights. And moving on with no official bet there, we are in the women's strawweight division. Former champ Carla Esparza, now in the third fight on the prelims. She was just the champion in her last fight, now in the third fight in the prelims. Kind of shows what I was saying about these women's MMA fights. Tisha Pennington on the other side, Tisha Torres favored -170, Carla Esparza +145. So it's Carla Esparza's retirement fight. She hasn't fought in 2 years, and she is also coming off of having a baby. Tisha had a baby, but has fought since then, and kind of shaken off some rust, and seems like she's still kind of interested in fighting. Obviously, her wife's still the champion, so the fact that Raquel has been doing really well lately kind of motivates Tisha, I bet. While Carla's definitely got one foot out the door. It's kind of interesting that Carla's even coming back. She just had a baby. You'd think, hey, focus on having your family and raising your child, but she still wants one more fight. I don't really know what that's about, but Carla Esparza, make no mistake, she's the better fighter, has the better career, right? She's the former champion. She has the much better wins. She has a more reliable way to win fights with her wrestling. Probably one of the best female grapplers in the history of MMA. And Tisha Pennington, though, is pretty good at stopping takedowns. She's done a good job of it in her past few fights. Mackenzie Dern was able to get some top time on her, but wasn't able to hit any takedowns. Ricci failed a lot of takedowns. So Pennington's not easy to take down, and she should be the better striker than Carla Esparza here. But like I said, one of the best women's grapplers of all time as the underdog here versus Pennington. So I'm leaning towards Tisha winning the fight. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Carla's got one foot out the door. But Carla still definitely has the skill set to provide problems. And I'm not interested in laying juice against Carla here. So no bet. The fight favored to go the distance here at -600, which is about as juice as you'll ever see a fight the GTD. But it's probably accurate. So we're going to go ahead and move on to a fight in the lightweight division. Alexander Hernandez, Austin Hubbard. Odds for this one, Hernandez -150, Austin Hubbard +130. A lot of Austin Hubbard action coming in the past few days. And it's probably right. You know, we got Alex Hernandez moving back up to 155. He's kind of been bouncing back and forth between weight classes lately. He had a few bad performances at 155, and then he moved down to 145. The bad performances continued. He missed weight for his last fight badly versus Damon Jackson. Missed it by 4 pounds. I mean, that was a split decision somehow, but he thoroughly lost that fight. Bill Algeo dominated him in that fight. So Hernandez lost 4 of his last 5, and bouncing back and forth between weight classes. Nothing really good sign from Hernandez, although the fact he did leave Factory X, which is going to be probably a good thing for his career. But Austin Hubbard got very lucky with his last decision win. That was kind of unanimously agreed upon, pretty lucky decision for him against Figlak. Before that, I didn't think he looked good versus Kurt Hollebach getting submitted there. So I think both these guys, there's not a whole lot to get excited about. And I think that we're most likely looking at a competitive decision between these two. Both are decent boxers. I would say that Hernandez is a little more likely to hit a takedown here, but I could realistically see either guy hitting takedowns or having success on the feet. So I think this should be competitive. The fight is favored to go the distance around 2-1, which I think is accurate and is probably a better way to play the fight than either money line. The fight going the distance around 65%, that seems like value to me. But if I think it's going to be a competitive fight that's going the distance, I like the fight to end by split decision at +330. You could either lay -200 on the GTD, or you could take +330 on the fight to be a split decision. And we know that anytime a fight is remotely close, it's very, very live to go to split decision, especially in a commission that doesn't do a ton of MMA fights in Utah. So that's the way I like to play the fight. And I'll honestly pick Hernandez to edge a split decision there. We're moving on to the Premier Division. The one of 2 fights in the Premier Division on this card. Ihor Potieria taking on Cesar-Almeida. Odds for this one, Almeida big favorite, -400. Potieria coming back +300. I lean towards the side of the dog in this one just because Almeida's too unproven in MMA to warrant this price. He only has 6 MMA fights. A lot of them were against bad competition. Before the Contender Series, the guy he beat was 5-28. Before that, 0-0. Before that, 0-0. So basically, he had the fight on the Contenders. He fought Budcut and Kopylov. He's essentially had 3 real MMA fights, and he is now an 80% favorite over Potieria. Potieria is not good. He's very flawed, but I think he does have the more legitimate career of the two of them, and possibly even the more well-rounded skill set, even though I don't think he's intelligent enough to be able to use his grappling effectively here. But we know Almeida can be put on bottom, as Kopylov just did, but Kopylov's a much better wrestler and fighter than Potieria. So I'm not counting on Potieria to come out and hit takedowns here, but at any time, if he does hit a takedown or Almeida gets a kick caught or something, we know that Almeida is not great at getting off his back, and that was exposed in his last fight. That alone makes it a little tough for me to get behind -400. And then Almeida does come from a kickboxing background and does have a good pedigree, but in MMA, I don't think we've seen that striking really show itself in like a dominant fashion, right? The Budka fight, even the fight on Contender Series, he wasn't like soundly beating those guys apart at distance. A lot of those fights took place close up and in the clinch, and I'm just not sold on Almeida being like a really good MMA fighter yet. So I think the side in this one is Potieria at 3-1, and I also like the fight to go over 1.5. Potieria is weak to the body. He can get hurt by body shots, but to the head, the guy can take a beating, and I think that there's a good chance this one stretches over 1.5 with Almeida just playing this one patient. Obviously, this one is at elevation too, so you got to think that maybe guys will be. This is a fight where I could see them trying to pace themselves a little bit more, and Almeida fights, he trains with Pereira as well, and I think those guys just have a little bit more of a patient striking style instead of just a balls to the wall trying to knock you out very quickly. So I'd like the over 1.5 for a bet there, and I actually think that Potieria is the side at 3-1 as well. We're moving on to another fight in the women's strawweight division. Marina Rodriguez is Yasmin Lucindo. Lucindo is the favorite, minus 191. Rodriguez plus 166. The thing that jumps out in this fight to me is just the stats between the two of them. Lucindo is 14 years younger. Marina Rodriguez has lost 3 of her last 4 fights. And Lucindo's on a bit of a roll. I believe she's won, 4 in a row? 3 in a row. Only lost to Harroguri, who's, regarded in pretty high standards by most people, even though I don't think that she's that good. So I think that's what a lot of people are looking at here. Lucindo's on a win streak. Rodriguez is struggling. Lucindo's so much younger. People are going with Lucindo for that reason. I think that's a little simplistic way to look at the fight because I think Lucindo needs to hit takedowns here to cover this price tag, and she does look to mix them in a decent bit, but it's not like she's some reliable shot wrestler who's taking all these women down and dominating from top positions. So I couldn't get behind Lucindo at juice. I think she probably will win just because, her career is going up. She's younger. She has more grappling upside. And Rodriguez, we know, is not good at defending takedowns. We know gets stuck on bottom. And at times, Rodriguez is so scared of the grappling that she doesn't really let her strikes go. Although this one should probably favor her if the fight stays on the feet. So I think this line is probably towards accurate with Lucindo. I definitely believe Lucindo should be the favorite. Maybe a little bit tighter, maybe around like 150 for Lucindo, but not enough meat on the bone for me to get behind Marina here. At I think she's 37, right? And she's fought tough competition lately, right? But I still can't get behind her here. I like Lucindo sub at 11-1 though. I think that if she's covering 200, it's with takedowns. If she's hitting takedowns, the sub could be there. I like that Lucindo sub 11-1. Moving on to the last fight on the prelims, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson making his first appearance on the prelims in 10 years, taking on Joaquin-Buckley. Odds for this one have Buckley as the favorite, minus 214. Wonderboy coming back plus 185. This line is very confusing to me. I think it's a clear side on Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and I will certainly be on him for a wager here. Buckley's striking style, we all know what it is. He wings a lot of wild shots, and he's actually been wrestling a lot more in his recent fights. But that kind of winging wild punches, I just think is tailor-made to get countered by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And we know Wonderboy is still good at what he does. He's not as fleet as foot. He has been getting taken down more and more likely in these fights, but when this fight is on the feet, I still think he has a really good chance at intercepting Buckley and hitting him with a lot of hard, straight shots, a lot of kicks to keep him at bay. And I think Buckley at 2-1 is very, very predicated on him hitting takedowns. But I think that there's a significant difference in the takedown abilities of Gilbert Burns, Bilal Muhammad, and Shavkat Rakhmonov compared to Joaquin-Buckley. The guys Buckley has been taking down are nowhere near the level of the guys who have been taking Wonderboy down. So I think there's a lot of confusing movement on this line with it going in the favor of Buckley so heavily. I mean, look at the guys Buckley's taken down. Alex Morono, Andre Fiallo, Ruzaboyev. Those guys aren't good. Okay, and they don't have good takedown defense. They're not good fighters. And Wonderboy Thompson, even though he's up there in age, he's 41 now. Historically, a very good fighter who's difficult to take down. And I just think that Buckley's going to have a hard time getting close enough to hit those takedowns. The big cage here, good for Wonderboy, and I got faith in Wonderboy here, man. I think when this one stays standing, he has a really good chance at hurting Buckley. And I don't think Buckley's very durable at 170 either. So I like Wonderboy here, man. I'm definitely going to be on him for a bet, just waiting to see where the line goes. But 185, I think, is a really good bet. And that's going to take us to the main card, which is kicking things off in the Premier Division. Great way to kick things off. Kevin Holland taking on Roman Dolidze. Odds to this one have Holland minus 150 and Dolidze at plus 130. Tough fight, in my opinion, to predict. It's a really conflicting fight for me because I'm pretty bad at betting Kevin Holland fights. I really am. And I looked up the stats on him on pay-per-views, he is 6-1 as the favorite. So they typically give him pretty favorable matchups on the pay-per-views, and he typically comes through and wins them with a finish. The only time he lost was versus Michael Venom Page recently in a semi-close fight. You know, it's a 29-28 loss for him. But this is a fight where I do believe Homan has the style to give Holland problems. We know Holland struggles with grapplers, control grapplers, guys who can, just grind him and slow his game down, because Kevin loves chaos. He loves wild exchanges and, hitting submissions at, unknown times, I guess you could say. But Roman, he likes fights slow and methodical and pushing you against the cage, and he does have pretty good control, and he can hit submissions from all different kinds of weird angles, and the guy is a pretty good overall grappler. And he's bouncing back and forth between 205 and 185. He's a natural 185er, though, so I think this is good that he's settling down at 185 here. Holland is still kind of moving back and forth between, a welterweight and 185. In his last fight, he was able to beat McCall. McCall is a small 185er, though. So I'm not sure why Kevin is moving back to 185 here. I think that was kind of a mistake. And I really think on paper, the grappling, the size advantage, and the style of fighting of Dolidze should be able to give Holland problems, similar to Vettori, similar to Derek Brunson. But I suck at betting Holland fights, and Kevin Holland always finds a way to win the fights on the pay-per-view. So, in a vacuum, I would say Dolidze is worth the bet. But with what I've known about Holland and how many times I've lost on him on pay-per-views, I think I'm going to stay away. But I do like, for a small bet, Roman by sub at 14-1. I think a lot of his success is predicated on grappling. We know he can hit those, knee bars and leg locks from interesting angles. And, this fight should feature a lot of grappling if Holland isn't just knocking him out instantly. So I like that bet at 14-1 to find a sub. Moving on to women's bantamweight division, Kayla Harrison, Ketlen-Vieira. Odds for this one have Harrison minus 1,200, Vieira plus 750. Okay. One more chance to kind of shit on women's MMA here. Kayla Harrison is a huge prospect that came into the UFC. Right? She ran through everybody in the PFL. She was thought of as such a dominant force. And she came to the UFC in her last fight, and she looked great. She really did. She dominated Holly Holm and won the fight in submission in round 2. It was a great performance. However, the fight starts, and the crowd is chanting Holly Holm's name. Holly Holm was, I believe, 42 years old at the time. She hasn't done anything of note in recent years. Her fights are so boring. Yet, when she was fighting this incredible juggernaut prospect, the crowd still loved Holly, and they still wanted Holly to win. You know why? Because nobody cares about Kayla Harrison. There's nothing to care about. And if she wins this fight and she faces the winner of Raquel and Pena, nobody's going to care. And if Kayla gets the belt and she's a dominant champion, nobody's going to care. So this is just pointless, but whatever. We'll keep talking about it. There's no bets to be made on this fight, though, so I'm not going to waste much time. It's a matter of how does Kayla win. Ketlen's only been finished once by knockout. She's never been submitted. I kind of think Harrison is a fighter who takes what you give her. So Holly Holm was making all these terrible mistakes and giving up judo throws and giving up the mount. That's why Kayla was able to finish. Aspen Ladd gets taken down, goes full guard, half guard, doesn't really try to do much. Kayla sails to a decision. So this outcome really depends on Ketlen. When Ketlen gets taken down, which she's going to here, does she try to get up? Does she try to give up her back? Does she try to show some urgency in getting back to her feet, or is she content to lay on bottom and to get controlled? I tend to think it's going to be the latter. I think she's going to, go full guard and just try to ride it out and make it to a decision. I think, obviously historically with women, you got to lean to them going to the decision. So I'll pick that for Kayla Harrison. But I really have no firm idea on how Kayla is going to win. Some people might think that Ketlen is value. She's kind of a top 5 woman. Ketlen wins fights by taking women down and laying on top of them. And that is very, very unlikely to happen versus Kayla here. So I think her path is pretty narrow. The odds are probably fine. And Kayla should win the fight. I'll go decision. Yeah, 30-27. Next fight. Great one here. Bantamweight division, men's bantamweight division. The greatest fighter ever, Jose Aldo, taking on Mario Bautista. Odds to this one have Bautista as the minus 145 favorite, taking on the King of Rio, Jose Aldo, at plus 125. I'm betting Jose Aldo. I'm doing it. He's the underdog. He's the greatest. He's the coolest. And I actually think this is not a bad matchup for him. Mario Bautista has been looking really good lately, and I think he's improving a lot fight to fight. He's on a great win streak, 6 wins, and especially his past 2 wins were really good fights over, good fighters and competitive fights versus Damon Blackshear and Ricky Simon. Before that, though, guys, Jay Perrin, Brian Kelleher, Benito Lopez, Guido Canetti, all total bums, complete scrub fighters. And I don't put a whole lot of stock into them. And Ricky Simon is past his prime. We saw that in his last fight, just nowhere near the fighter he once was. Damon Blackshear's a solid fighter, but I wouldn't even put him in the top 25 at bantamweight, and that fight was competitive. It was a clear 29-28 win for Mario, but it was a competitive fight. So Bautista is good and he is improving, but he is spending a lot of time in top position in some of his recent fights. A lot of his fights were submission wins. The Blackshear fight had a good amount of top control in it. Versus Ricky, not so much. He didn't have top control. But I think that, you could point to, 5 of his last 6 wins, he was the better grappler and won those fights with a lot of grappling. I don't think you can count on him to get takedowns versus Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo has the best takedown defense in MMA history. And even as recently as 2 years ago, in Salt Lake City, Utah, he fought Merab Dvalishvili and he shut down 16 of 16 takedown attempts in that fight. So we know his takedown defense is still really good, and I think it would be pretty unlikely for Bautista to end up in top position here. So it leads me to believe this is a striking fight. And as we saw versus Jonathan Martinez, even a past prime bantamweight version of Jose Aldo is still a significantly better striker than even a good striker at 135 right now. I think Bautista is a better fighter than Jonathan Martinez, but not by a huge margin. So I think this line is fading Aldo too early. I still think Aldo's got plenty left in the tank to give Bautista a lot of problems. I think it's a striking fight, and I have not seen Jose Aldo decline enough to think that Mario Bautista is going to get the better of him here. So I love Aldo as a plus money bet. I would probably put Aldo as a slight favorite. And hey, if Mario Bautista wins, I would be happy for the kid, honestly, because I really think he has put in the work and has improved a lot in his recent fights, but he has not proven enough to warrant being a favorite over Jose Aldo in this spot. So I will be going with Aldo. I do believe he wins the fight by decision. The fight is very, very likely to hit the cards at minus 275, which is probably accurate because I don't see either of these guys finishing each other. And I'm going to be going with Jose Aldo to win. Hopefully the judges give him a little bit of a rub. Obviously, he's the more well-known fighter, and the crowd should be going behind Jose Aldo for sure. So hopefully we get a little bit of favorable judging if the rounds are close. But, I mean, the rounds last time versus Martinez were shutouts. They were pitched, he pitched a perfect game in that fight, even at, what is he, 36 years of age, even 40 fights into his career. He's been in the highest, he's 38 now, holy shit. But man, I just can't say enough good things about Jose Aldo. The guy is so fucking good, and 14-3 in decisions in his lifetime. He was in the WEC in 2008. That was the highest level for the lower level weight class guys back then. So he's been at the top skill level in MMA for over 16 years, and he really hasn't slowed down. And he's just phenomenal, and I have to go with him to win the fight here. And I'm going down with the ship. I would much rather lose a bet on Jose Aldo at plus money than ever bet against him. So can't wait for that one there. Great piece of matchmaking. Well done by the UFC. We're moving on to the co-main event in the women's bantamweight division. Champion Raquel Pennington taking on Juliana Pena as the dog. Raquel minus 156, Juliana Pena plus 136. I like Raquel. I'm not a big fan of Juliana. And This fight, I think, has a lot of similarities to Raquel's fight against Maria Bueno Silva, and it also has kind of a similar dynamic to her wife's fight on the prelims, Tisha versus Carla, where we have, I would say, the more active and the more well-rounded fighter in Tisha and Raquel taking on the more dedicated grappler, the little more one with more questions, the one off a longer layoff, Carla Esparza and Juliana, also former champions themselves. So similar dynamics there. Pena, going back and refreshing my mind on her, a lot of her wins are kind of comeback wins, right? Where she loses the fight early and she has good, resolve and grit in there, and she comes back and wins. That Nico Montano won the first round. Pena took over in the second and third. Sarah McMahon won the first round or round and a half. Pena took over and won the second and third. Even Nunes won the first round of their fight, and then she came back to win the second round. So she's tough. She has some good resiliency, but she's not a woman who comes out and wins these fights very clearly. And she really hasn't won a fight like start to finish in 8 years since Kat Zingano. So a lot of flaws with her, man. I think her striking is weak as piss. She's just a terrible striker, quite frankly. And I think if you watch the Germaine de Randamie fight, man, that fight, she looked horrible in that fight. She struggled to get takedowns. She looked scared on the feet. She got a takedown in round 2. She lost the position and ended up on bottom. And then she got guillotined by kickboxer Germaine de Randamie, which is just so pathetic. It's so pathetic. Now she hasn't fought in over 2 years since getting destroyed by Amanda Nunes. She is the younger fighter than Raquel, but she is still 35 years old. So I don't have much faith in Juliana Pena here, but I will say that her style of shooting takedowns could give Raquel problems, because we did see that her struggle with Bueno Silva's takedowns early. She got taken down. She got her back taken twice in the first 2 rounds. She did good defending. And Raquel Pennington has made a career out of fighting grapplers and stopping their takedowns and outstriking them on the feet. It happened versus, realistically, her past 4 fights, Chiesa and Ladd, Vieira, Silva, all those women like to grapple, and most of them failed with their grappling, and Raquel persisted, or she got up from takedowns and she out-hustled them. And, Raquel, much more active, much more reliable cardio, and I think the longer this fight goes, the more it favors the more it favors Raquel Pennington, which is kind of the opposite of the way some of Pena's fights have gone. Pena's recent fights, she struggles early, she comes back on the women later. I don't think that that's as likely to happen here. I think if Pena is struggling early, I think she's going to struggle late. And I even think if Pena wins the first 2 rounds here, I think she could run out of steam, because it's at elevation. She hasn't fought in so long. The last fight versus Amanda Nunes, she looked absolutely horrible in the later rounds as well. So I'm going with Raquel Pennington to win the fight. I think that before the fight, -156, I do give Raquel a better chance to win the fight than the odds. However, I think it's best to wait for a live bet here, because let's see what Juliana's approach is. Let's see how adamant Juliana is about the takedowns. If Juliana is content to strike and trying to fight behind a jab, then she's in trouble, and Raquel is probably going to box her up and put some damage on her. And then when Juliana starts shooting her takedowns, it's going to be too late. And I really think this approach really matters on how Pena approaches it. Some props for the fight. If you like Pena, I think the sub in rounds 1 or 2 at plus 1,300 is a decent bet. And for Raquel Pennington, a bet I've made on her myself is for her to win in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round by TKO at 44-1. Her last fight, that bet wouldn't have hit, but it obviously had a very, very good chance to win, because Bueno Silva was exhausted in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Raquel was on top. Raquel wasn't in control. Raquel never put a whole lot of strikes or damage on her or chased that finish. But with Pena 2 years away from the cage, not showing good 5-round experience from what we've seen, it's entirely possible that Pena is just dead tired and finds a way to get finished in those later rounds. So I like that 44-1 on 3-4-5 KO, and I'll pick Raquel Pennington to win a 49-46 decision here. And we are moving on to the last fight on the card, the championship fight in the light heavyweight division. Champion Alex Pereira versus Khalil Rountree. Odds for this one have Alex Pereira minus 460, Rountree coming back 360 dog. So just like I talked about how great Jose Aldo was, how he's the greatest fighter ever, Alex Pereira is the greatest thing to happen to the UFC in the past several years. And I'm extremely confident in that. And he has absolutely carried the UFC for the past 2 years. And what he's been able to do with how limited his MMA experience is so remarkable. And this guy should be applauded. And, he, for taking the short notice fight versus Jiri the first time, he defended his belt on somewhat short notice versus Jamal Hill. He fought again on somewhat short notice versus Jiri Prochazka the second time. I mean, he takes the fights on short notice. He's in the biggest stages: Madison Square Garden, UFC 300, International Fight Week. He lives up to the expectations each and every time, delivering spectacular knockouts. Each one more spectacular than the last. The Jiri one, it was kind of a quick stoppage, right? The Jamal Hill, incredible left hook knockout. And then Jiri the second time, the incredible head kick knockout. This guy is the gift that just keeps on giving, and he's the greatest, man. He is so fucking fun, and his fights are so exciting. And what he's been able to do in the past 12 months, this would be his third title defense. It would be a record-breaking title defense, breaking Ronda Rousey's record. It would be his fourth title win in 11 months. Which is just so unprecedented. And man, I fucking love this guy. He's got aura. He's got the shama. I don't know, man. If you don't like Alex Pereira, man, I think there's something wrong with you. I think there's something severely wrong with you if you do not like Alex Pereira, because he is, I think, the most exciting fighter in the UFC right now. Tom Aspinall is a step behind him, but Alex Pereira is must-see TV, and he's transcended MMA. This guy, he barely speaks, he doesn't speak any English, right? He doesn't really try hard to be a personality, but he is so exciting, and he is so vicious in the cage that he has transcended MMA. And I know people who don't watch MMA at all, but they go around saying Shama, and they know who he is, and they know the Easter Island head type guy. So, man, I fucking love Alex Pereira. And some people are going to shit on this matchup, right? They're saying Khalil Rountree doesn't deserve it. And he doesn't. He definitely doesn't. But this fight still fucking rocks because we get a chance to see Alex Pereira again, which is great. There's, this guy could fight every month and I would never get tired of him. We're getting a striker. We're getting a guy who's not going to try to take him down and test him, really. And it should be an opponent for Alex Pereira to just style on and get another highlight reel knockout. And that's what I'm picking him to do. And I think that that's the totally logical pick here. I understand that Khalil is an underdog. He's a 4-1 underdog, and that automatically entices some people here. But I'm going to go out and do something a little bold. And it's a very high risk, low reward thing. Because I'm not betting Pereira at minus 500. I'm not. But I really think that anybody betting Khalil is fucking dumb. I really think so, man. Because Khalil is kind of a fake good striker. He had that one Eric Anders fight and people thought he was some Thailand genius, some renovated Muay Thai fighter. But I actually don't believe Khalil's striking is even good. And if you watch the Dustin Jacoby fight less than 2 years ago, you will see that, man. I mean, he got soundly outstruck by Dustin Jacoby. Dustin Jacoby landed more strikes to the head, to the body, to the legs. He won rounds 1 and 2 of that fight so clearly. MMA decisions had 89% round 1 for Jacoby, 90% round 2 for Jacoby. I don't know how on earth one of the judges gave Rountree each of those rounds, but they did, and they gave him a split decision, but he totally deserved to lose that fight, and he soundly got outstriked by Dustin Jacoby, who is an old and slow former glory kickboxer who was never even close to the level of Alex Pereira. And then since then, he blasted Chris Daukaus. He knocked out bum-ass Anthony Smith. I mean, I see no possible reason why Khalil Rountree should win this fight. I think that minus 5 to 600, somewhere in the 80% range for Alex Pereira is completely justifiable, and I think Alex Pereira is going to absolutely fucking blast him out in the first 2 rounds and make it easy. I've made a lot of money on Pereira in his past several fights because the market has been underrating him. I think they're finally rating him correctly here, but I still think there's money to be made because Pereira to win by knockout in the first 2 rounds is plus 100 even money, and that's a bet I like. I don't see what if Khalil is aggressive and he's throwing strikes, he's going to get countered, he's going to get hurt. And I think if Khalil isn't aggressive, he is going to get caught by just the speed and the precision of Alex Pereira here with the left hook or the high kick or who knows. I think the leg kicks of Pereira are going to tear up the inside leg of Khalil with the southpaw matchup. And I don't know, man. I would be mortally shocked to see Khalil Rountree win this fight. And, hey, if I'm wrong, if anybody's listening to this, you have total authority to come back and tell me that I'm an idiot. I'm so wrong. I was so wrong about this one. But, it's not exactly a bold take confidently picking the minus 500 here. But I'm firmly doing so, and I think he's gonna absolutely murder Khalil Rountree. And I hope they bring out the stretcher, man. I hope Khalil Rountree is like seizing after this knockout. Hopefully. But yeah, Poatan should prevail, and he should retain his belt and retain the throne as the greatest attraction in the UFC right now. And we're lucky to be witnessing this guy fight. So that's going to do it for this card. I'm looking forward to this card a lot. My favorite fighter of all time is Jose Aldo. My favorite fighter right now is Alex Pereira. And we get them both fighting back-to-back, except with a women's MMA 5-round title fight in between them. Jesus Christ. So yeah, this is a good one. Bets I like on this card: Pereira KO round 1, round 2. That Rocky 3-4-5 KO prop. Jose Aldo money line. Roman Dolidze submission. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson money line is Yasmin Lucindo submission. The Almeida Potieria over 1.5. Alex Hernandez and Austin Hubbard fight to end by split decision, and Court McGee money line. So got a bet I like on pretty much every fight except for Carla and Tisha and OSP-Spann. And that's going to do it for me. So hope you all enjoy the podcast. Thank you all for listening. Hope you all enjoy the fights, win some bets, and I will see you all before the next UFC event next week. Peace out, everyone.